Dawn never truly breaks over a city that is already doomed. But on this cold March morning in 146 BC, Corinth at least pretends the sun will rise like any other. Traders shuffle into the agora with cedar chests of Tyrian dye. Potters knock clay from their fingernails as they stack freshly fired craters. Flute girls in purple cloaks rehearse a new melody brought by sailors from Rhodes. Yet an unease slithers beneath every greeting. Rumor says the Roman camp across the isthmus has grown beyond counting. Says their siege engines are taller than the temple of Apollo. Says the legion's eagle standards cast longer shadows each day, as if the birds sense they will soon feast here. And rumor, everyone knows, travels on the wind only when truth is galloping close behind. Still, denial is a stubborn refuge. Achaean magistrates assure citizens that the gods who avenged Marathon and Salamis will not abandon them now. Artisans tell themselves Rome wants tariffs, not ruins. Even the cynical Hetaira, who has entertained 4 Roman deserters in as many nights, insists men who laugh over wine cannot possibly torch a city's heart. But listen, somewhere beyond Corinth's double walls, pickaxes bite earth to set catapults. Hammer strokes ring like distant thunder as iron nails are driven into siege towers. Legionary centurions murmur options, as they mark each cohort's place in the grisly ballet to come. In that layering of sounds, commerce pretending eternity atop industry preparing obliteration, lies the question that will hold your attention for the next 2 hours. How did a city once hailed the jewel of Hellas reach the brink where one match could darken centuries of brilliance? More provocatively, why did Rome decide that match must be struck no matter the cost? And what could possibly persuade a disciplined republic to exchange future revenue for present ashes? Keep watching, because the answer will drag you through intrigue, betrayal, unyielding pride, and the brutal arithmetic of empire that concludes, sometimes, the only manageable rival is a smoking crater. Corinth's misfortune began long before the first Roman legionary set foot on Greek soil. The city's strategic position, straddling the isthmus, commanding both the Saronic and Corinthian gulfs, made it the toll booth of the eastern Mediterranean. Every grain ship from Egypt to Macedon, every treasure galley from Syria to Sicily, passed under her towers or through her Diolkos portage road. Wealth poured in like tidewater, silver stater coins stamped with Pegasus, crimson textiles woven finer than spider silk, philosophers seeking patronage, mercenaries hungry for pay. Such prosperity bred a confidence bordering on arrogance, and Corinth's alliances shifted with prophet's compass. When Alexander died, she tilted toward Macedon. When Macedon stumbled after Cynocephalae, she courted Rome. When Rome demanded humiliating concessions after the Second Macedonian War, she rallied behind the fiery orators of the Achaean League. By the 150s BC, that league, once a cooperative of Peloponnesian poleis, had grown into a federation determined to restore Greek self-rule. It passed egalitarian laws, fielded joint armies, minted shared currency, and, most dangerously, treated Rome as an ally of convenience rather than a master. To the Roman Senate, still nursing the scars of Hannibal's rampage and suspicious of any confederation with the word league attached, the Achaeans looked increasingly like a patient who refuses mild medicine and therefore invites drastic surgery. The catalyst came in 148 BC when Sparta, never comfortable under Achaean authority, petitioned Rome for autonomy. Roman commissioners granted it, effectively amputating one of the Peloponnese's most famous city-states from the League. Achaean radicals exploded with fury. They seized Roman envoys, threatened Spartan partisans, and, in a move breathtakingly naive, declared that any decision about Greek cities belonged to Greeks alone. The Senate replied with legions. Consul Quintus Caecilius Metellus crushed a northern revolt at Scarpheia, then wintered in Macedonia while Rome appointed a new consul, Lucius Mummius, to finish the job. Mummius was no Scipio Africanus. Livy describes him as unacquainted with the refinements of Hellenic culture. But he possessed two traits lethal to Corinth: methodical patience and an unshakable brief from the Senate that this war would end with the annihilation of Achaean resistance, not another diplomatically messy treaty. So it was that in early 146 BC, the Achaean strategos, Diaeus of Megalopolis, found himself shepherding an army of perhaps 34,000 citizen hoplites, a sprinkling of mercenaries, and a handful of cavalry against Mummius's force of 46,000 legionaries, allies, and Numidian horse. Diaeus fortified Corinth's Acropolis, laid fire traps in its suburbs, and stationed a flotilla on the Gulf to harass Roman supply lines. He hoped attrition and the coming summer fevers would erode the enemy's resolve. What he failed to grasp, what countless Greek commanders had missed since Cynocephalae, is that the legion was not merely a formation, but an organism. It adapted, consumed obstacles, and evolved mid-campaign. It had beaten phalanxes, elephants, even Hannibalic trickery, and it had learned from each foe. Nor did Diaeus realize that Rome's strategy extended beyond battlefield victory. Letters uncovered at Patrae reveal Senate orders encouraging Mummius to make a dread spectacle of Corinth as a deterrent to other restive provinces. The city's fate, in other words, was sealed before the first Pila flew. The prelude to the final encounter played out under a crescent moon. Achaean scouts reported Roman engineers excavating trenches on the plain west of Corinth, their outlines forming a vast rectangle, space for a camp large enough to swallow a city. Diaeus responded with a night raid. 3,000 picked troops crept through vineyards, knives muffled in wool, aiming to slaughter sleepers and burn siege works. But Mummius, wary after a similar attack at Leuctra, positioned cohorts in silent readiness just inside the palisade. When the Corinthians slipped under the fosse, they slammed into a wall of shields. Torches erupted, trumpet bits blared, and the raiders were cut down almost to a man. Survivors crawled back to the city, whispering that legions see in the dark. Panic rippled through the citizen army. Some deserted, others demanded immediate surrender. Diaeus answered by executing perceived cowards, a purge that further drained morale. Meanwhile, Mummius completed a ring of forts encircling Corinth, each linked by stockades and patrolled by Numidian cavalry, who chased down any messenger or forager daring the plain. Over the next week, starvation, not skirmish, became the besieged's gravest enemy. Street fighting in Corinth proved a hellscape distinct even from Rome's brutal urban wars. The city's narrow lanes, flanked by colonnaded stoas and marble-faced houses, funneled attackers into kill zones where slingers on rooftops showered fist-sized stones. Legionaries countered by using their scuta as mantlets, advancing turtle-style until they reached doorways, then shattering lintels with axes and flushing defenders with firepots. Flickers of flame leapt from one cedar roof to the next, despite frantic citizen bucket lines. Meanwhile, on the main western avenue, the Achaean hoplite phalanx attempted a counter-push, shield to shield, spearheads projecting like a serrated wall. They actually halted 2 Roman cohorts, but the confidence lasted minutes. Mummius had drilled his officers to exploit phalanx rigidity. As soon as the Greek line engaged frontally, a whistle blast sent maniples sprinting down side alleys to emerge on the flanks. One contingent even commandeered a brewer's cart, filled it with amphorae of beer, and rolled it downhill into the hoplite right wing. Amphorae exploded, showering shards. Panic blossomed. Legionaries hacked into exposed sides. Pila used as stabbing spears. What began as a disciplined stand devolved into knots of men wrestling amid broken pottery and spilled grain. While steel clashed inside, outside the walls, Mummius unveiled another stroke. He ordered his artillery, 60 catapults and 20 ballistae, shifted to fire incendiary bolts over the ramparts. These missiles, wrapped in pitch-soaked rags, arced like fiery comets and slammed into the densely packed merchant district. Linen awnings erupted, olive oil amphorae burst like grenades, and wind off the Gulf funneled fire eastward. Soon, pillars of smoke rose so thick they blotted out Helios himself. Plutarch claims citizens saw the sky turn the color of dried blood and interpreted it as a final omen. Realistically, the smoke also blinded lookouts and disrupted Achaean command communication. Runners lost bearings, officers shouted contradictory orders, and pockets of resistance fought. Unaware, the city behind them was already aflame. Diaeus witnessed the chaos from the steps of the Temple of Aphrodite atop Corinth. Realizing Corinth was lost, he galloped to a treasury vault, seized what gold he could, ordered the execution of Roman prisoners to deny propaganda value, and fled toward Megalopolis. His desertion shattered the last fiber of organized defense. When legionaries reached the agora, they found archers, merchants, priestesses, and children barricaded together behind overturned wagons. A few begged for slavery over death. Others fought with silver-gilded kitchen knives. One account describes a priest of Poseidon cursing Rome, then igniting his own oil-soaked beard, transforming himself into a living torch that he hurled against a Pila wall. Pathos could not match steel. By afternoon, resistance had degenerated into isolated rooftop duels and desperate last stands in basement storerooms where families huddled under damp hides, hoping stone walls would outlast flame. None did. Here, the narrative turns from battle to butchery. Mummius, despite Roman historiography later casting him as reluctant, issued no order to restrain his troops for 2 full days. Legionaries looted statues, tore golden leaf from temple doors, pried gems from cult effigies. Veterans who had campaigned in Spain remarked, even Carthago Nova had contained less portable wealth. Priceless paintings by Timanthes and frescoes by Zeuxis were ripped from frames or left to curl in heat. Women and children were herded in chains to the isthmus and branded for the slave markets of Delos. One teenage girl, Polybian sources say, was auctioned for her weight in saffron. When a detachment of Roman allies protested the destruction of the Temple of Apollo, arguing it might anger the gods, Mummius allegedly replied, "Better angry gods than living enemies." The phrase entered Latin satire as shorthand for realpolitik at its bleakest. Yet even pillage has limits. On the 3rd day, pillars cracked and roofs collapsed, threatening to crush encamped plunderers. The stench of burning cedar mixed with roasted flesh wafted downwind so thick some legionaries vomited inside their helmets. Mummius finally sounded assembly. He ordered the city torched entirely. sparing only a few administrative buildings to serve as charred witness to Rome's ire. Polybius, himself an Achaean held hostage in Rome, later walked the ruins and wrote, "Not even the crows could find perches where once 30,000 columns stood." The Diolkos' grooved stone trackways melted, bronze statues fused, the famed fountain of Perini steamed dry as its vaulted chambers collapsed. When flames at last starved from lack of fuel, Corinth was less a ruin than a scorched smear on a blackened plain. Why such thorough destruction? Economics partly. Eliminating Corinth removed a commercial rival to Roman ports. Politics also. It signaled to Macedon, Pergamon, and Egypt that Roman tolerance had boundaries. But beneath surface reasons lay ideology. Rome in the mid-2nd century was shimmering with newfound confidence after vanquishing Carthage. Senators like Cato preached that foreign luxury corrupted Roman virtue. Corinth, epitome of Hellenistic opulence, silk-swathed symposia, perfume-scented heterae, statues on every street corner, became a moral scapegoat. By purging it, Rome dramatized a narrative. Austere republic triumphs over decadent Greece. Of course, within decades, Roman villas would overflow with the very art looted from these ashes, but empire often feeds on what it publicly condemns. In the months following, 12 Greek cities sent embassies begging clemency. Mummius levied indemnities, dismantled the Achaean League, and installed Roman-friendly oligarchies. Greece technically became free, but every garrisoned fortress suggested otherwise. The Senate decreed that no one could rebuild Corinth. Cattle grazed where philosophers once debated. Yet memory has its own resurrection. A century later, Julius Caesar, chasing a legacy to match Alexander's, refounded Colonia Lausiulia Corinthiensis on the same site. Veterans and freedmen repaved streets. New temples rose over charred foundations, and merchants again prospered. Rome could raise stone, but could not extinguish the geographic magnetism of that isthmus. Ironically, Corinth's second life under Roman rule lasted far longer than its classical autonomy. Ash drifts do not merely bury the past, they fertilize questions. What if Diaeus had surrendered before the siege, preserving lives at the cost of pride? Would Rome have found another pretext? Or would Greek autonomy have survived in some federated form? Likewise, what does Corinth teach about modern powers whose patience with dissent ebbs as their reach expands? In our era of global networks, economic choke points, and cultural cross-pollination, does the logic of preemptive devastation still tempt hegemonic states? And at a personal scale, how often do we, like the Achaean radicals, cling to principles so tightly that we turn potential compromise into mutual ruin? If the crackle of Corinth's burning marble has stirred you, do not let the lesson fade with the smoke. Share this narrative with a friend who thinks history is only the dead speaking to the dead. Show them it is the living echo of choices we still face. Subscribe and ring the bell to join our community of time travelers who refuse to learn tragedy by repetition alone. Comment which forgotten battlefield, besieged city, or political gamble you want unburied next. Numantia's last stand, Masada's silent pact, or perhaps the day Kiev's golden gates clanged shut against Batu's horsemen. Together we will keep digging, keep questioning, and keep the embers of critical curiosity glowing long after the legions march out of sight.